I'd like to take this opportunity to answer a question from one of my viewers. He'd like to know, how do I know when to stop on a piece and when is it done? To answer your question, I stop working on a piece when I get sick of working on it or I lose interest, which, doesn't take too long to happen after a certain amount of hours, especially if I've been working on it, for maybe 6 or 8 hours at a time. I just kind of get sick of sitting there and my hand cramps up and my eyes start to hurt, and I just go, you know what, there's really nothing else I can do to make this piece look any better. I'm done with it. I don't want to work on it anymore. I'm going to move on to the next piece. And something to mention is that, digital art kind of doesn't really have a time limit. You could stop working on it and come back to it later, years later, and add to it if you wanted to, and there wouldn't be anything wrong with doing that. So you don't really have to worry about finishing pieces, although you should, try to make an effort to complete something if you've, obviously started working on it. If it's a piece that I'm getting paid to do, then I have no choice but to finish it when the client's satisfied. And that's pretty easy. You just keep going, and when they like it, and then, if you're happy with it too, then you stop. Sometimes that makes it easier to complete a piece. In some cases, I've gone back and added to pieces that I created years ago and maybe touched them up and added some details. I'll show you an example of that. Here we'll take a look at this Buddha painting I did. I think it was in 2009 or 2010, somewhere around there. And it looked really cool when I painted it, but what I see now, having learned a little bit more from having done more paintings, is that the edges are too sharp in some places. There's a little bit of jagged edges on some of these arms here. It's also too dark overall. It really needs some lighting and contrast improvements. So it needs a little bit of work. So I didn't touch it at all until a few years later in 2012. And I decided one day, I think it was after I'd done some prints and I noticed that the prints were too dark, that I decided that it needs a little bit more detail here. So now it looks like this, and we'll look at a before and after, and you can kind of see how it changed. I cropped it differently because this was a really weird, it seemed aesthetically really cool to do this weird kind of cropping here on it at the time, but then I realized that it didn't print very well on this shape, so I made it to a more standard size. I improved the lighting, I did some blurring and some blending, enhanced the brightness of the blue hair, and just kind of added a few little details here and there to improve upon it. But I didn't really change it that drastically. And I might decide, 2 years from now, that maybe there's some other little detail that I want to change. I don't go back to finished pieces often because, once it's finished, it should just kind of be finished. But if you do see something that bothers you, go back and fix it. There's nothing wrong with that. But part of being an artist is really about being able to judge when a piece is complete. Adding too much detail isn't necessarily a benefit. Some things look better unfinished. Like, for instance, this piece here that I did in 2011, I did in kind of just a quick one layer sketch style where I just kind of started painting. I didn't know what I was going to do, and I wasn't concerned about adding a lot of detail. I just kind of wanted to get the impression of what was going on here. And I didn't even bother sketching it out. I just kind of just started painting just from imagination. I came up with this. And I could have definitely added more detail everywhere. I could have done this all in a whole bunch of different layers. But you know what? It really doesn't make any difference. People still like this piece a lot. I've sold prints of it. It doesn't need to be any more detailed than it is here because it still conveys the message just fine. And there are a lot of people out there, art collectors, who prefer a more simple style over something that's too photorealistic. So to give you an example of something that's a little bit too detailed, we can take a look at this piece here. And if we zoom in to 100%, we can see down here in the sand, there's like epic amounts of detail here. You can see every grain of sand and all these pebbles and all this stuff. And it looks really great up close. And if I did a really big print, you'd be able to see all that detail. It would look fine. However, when I do small prints of this, 4x6 prints, it shrinks down quite a bit. And now all of that nice sand detail and all of these pebbles are just kind of little specks. And I may as well have just painted it with an airbrush with a lot less detail and spent, you know, a couple minutes doing it versus however long it took me to paint the sand. So you can kind of see here that having a lot of detail in a piece isn't always a benefit. There really isn't a rule to follow here other than just do what you feel is right for each piece, and that's really just kind of up to you. It's good to try to be an efficient painter. If you're wasting time by erasing and undoing and repainting and just being indecisive, that's going to make it harder to finish a piece. Part of being decisive is being confident in your integrity as an artist. Every artist sees flaws in their work, and that's the nature of the artistic mind. You'll never be satisfied with your work, and that's a good thing because it'll force you to keep challenging yourself. Having said that, rather than spend too much time on one painting, start a new similar painting and try to improve upon your technique. Each additional painting you create will look better than the last. So I'll show you one more example of a painting that I came back to because I wasn't all that happy with it, but at the time, for about a year, I was happy with it, and I called it complete, and I posted it online, and I sold prints of it and things. And at the time it was complete. But then about a year later, I realized this is way too dark and I want to add just a couple more details. And I also decided that I just kind of wanted just to flip it horizontally. So I did that too. And you can see here, it didn't change a whole lot, but it changed enough to improve the piece. But you can see it definitely made it look better, but it didn't change it, and it wasn't really a drastic change. It was pretty minimal. I mean, I really just went into Photoshop and improved the lighting and then drew in a few extra details on the hair and did a little bit more shading and highlights on the body and things like that. Improved this glow here. So, you know, sometimes you can just kind of call it good temporarily too, if you feel that that's easier, and then just come back to it in a year or a month or a day or a few more hours. You know, it's kind of up to you. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but it gives you some options. If any of my other viewers have questions they'd like me to answer, just shoot me an email or send me a message here on YouTube or Facebook, and I'd be glad to answer it for you. Thanks for watching.